The latest problems for the unlucky Apollo 13 and for the astronauts came late tonight when carbon dioxide began building up in their spaceship. The Apollo 13 carries lithium hydroxide canisters to cleanse the air of carbon dioxide, but the canisters in the command ship are not operating at the moment.
April 9th, 1959. NASA introduces its first class of astronauts. All 7 begin a crash course in space travel.
Once we were selected, it was sort of open-ended as to what kind of things people could think up for us to do that might have some weird remote application to spaceflight.
Wally Schirra endures a heat chamber. Gus Grissom tries to fly blindfolded. And John Glenn becomes a human test dummy for G-forces. Astronauts call this centrifuge the Beast.
You're straining just as hard as you possibly can strain to keep enough blood up in your head to keep from blacking out.
They spin so violently that their hearts bang into their lungs, knocking the wind out of them. They test for every condition they can imagine in spaceflight. But what about weightlessness? The Air Force devises a way to simulate zero gravity. The Mercury 7 are again the guinea pigs. A C-131 transport ascends to 40,000 feet. Inside are the future astronauts and one nervous reporter with a tape recorder.
My hand is shaking. I don't know if my voice sounds funny or not.
Then the plane tops out like a roller coaster. And the men begin to float.
We are now weightless. We are now weightless. Good Lord, what an interesting feeling this is.
Doctors have no idea if humans can survive long in weightlessness. Will their organs function? Will food stay down if there's no up or down anymore? They call this the vomit comet. And it's the only way to test the possibilities and problems of zero gravity. The Air Force even tries it on animals. They appear far less enthusiastic. It's a Friday in Cape Kennedy, Florida. The Apollo 1 crew ends a long week with a test of the command module. A weekend with family is on their minds.
I seem to get busier all the time, and I find that I'm home less and less. That's about the way it's been going.
This is footage from another test a few months earlier. They will simulate space-flying conditions inside the capsule. As Friday morning turns to afternoon, they ascend the launch tower.
We've run one altitude chamber test on the spacecraft. We'll be running another one, and then we'll start our final preparations for launch.
They enter the capsule on top of the rocket. It's not fueled yet, so the test is considered non-hazardous. They close the hatch and pressurize the spacecraft with pure oxygen, exactly how it will be in space. Ground control and the Apollo 1 crew begin a long checklist.
Negative. Launch vehicle guide. Roger.
Communication problems cause delays and frustration.
Okay, Gus, you're pretty garbled.
More than 2 hours into the test, Grissom goes off script to express his annoyance.
How are we going to get the moon if we can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings?
Then, there's a surge of voltage somewhere in the electrical system. Spotty communication reveals the capsule is on fire.
Hey! Oh, so far in the cockpit.
Ground control tries to hail the astronauts.
Hey, crew, can you egress at this time?
They call the workers on the launch pad.
Confirm it. Bad leader, get in there and help them.
It's only 17 seconds from the first call of alarm to radio silence.
Des, can you read us?
It's already too late.
That fire erupted. It didn't just spread. It was an explosive combustion. The hull of the spacecraft had ruptured from the pressure of the fire. The temperature got up to 1,200 degrees. There were puddles of aluminum that had melted during the fire.
It was sparked by an electrical short, fed by pure oxygen, and contained by the heavy hatch designed to lock out space. Instead, it locked in fire.
Nobody at NASA realized that they were putting those 3 astronauts into a bomb that was waiting to go off.
October 25th.
The plan was to launch an unmanned target rocket called the Agena, and then have the astronauts launch and chase it in orbit, move in and dock.
The Agena breaks up on ascent. The failed Agena rocket launch forces a new plan.
Look, why not use Gemini 6 to rendezvous with the mission that's going to fly after it, Gemini 7?
2 crews, 2 ships, 1 mission. Find each other in space. Gemini 7 will go first. Frank Borman and Jim Lovell will try to break the endurance record in space. A 2-week marathon stuck inside their tiny capsule.
Jim Lovell called it 2 weeks in a men's room.
Now they just sit, skimming the globe, waiting for Gemini 6.
It was boring. You know, when you're just drifting, tumbling through space, time goes slow.
It doesn't help that Borman can't change his clothes.
This suit was designed with the idea in mind that they had to make the astronauts comfortable in order to do meaningful work in space. That helmet gave an impression of an insect. The suit became known as the grasshopper suit.
The grasshopper suit is more flexible than a standard spacewalk suit. But nothing is comfortable for 2 straight weeks.
Lovell and I had been up there for 11 or 12 days. I don't remember how long. We were tired. It was a real high point to see this bright light look like a star. It came up, and then eventually we could see it was a Gemini vehicle.
They came up, and we stayed together. We each took turns flying around each other to see how nicely the spacecraft would control on something like that.
Wally Schirra, piloting the newly arrived Gemini 6, can measure his moves in inches.
Again, it was little tiny, tiny thrusts. I call it a micro mouse fart. You've got to have these very slow changes where you don't waste a lot of fuel.
They even get close enough for the former servicemen to heckle each other. Spaceflight's first rendezvous is a win. The joint mission also proves that astronauts can survive a moon-length marathon, 2 weeks of space camping.
I don't know how in the world we could, but in that small area, somehow, we lost a toothbrush. We ended up sharing toothbrush.
This airplane has the look of a toy, but it's real and ingenious. Nicknamed the Pregnant Guppy, it's wide enough to carry space hardware and comes apart to get that hardware in and out. First, the stages of a rocket. They'll have to put it together like building blocks. Then, a Gemini capsule. Everything looks right out of a kid's toy box. But this is full scale, exceptionally complex, uncommonly expensive. And Gus Grissom is about to make it really fly. Grissom joins rookie John Young as America's first two-person crew for the maiden voyage of Project Gemini.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition.
Gemini 3 pierces into the sky, flying straight and true.
The powered flight was very smooth, smoother than we had any reason to expect, and there isn't a jiggle or a bump in it in the whole first stage flight.
I have your backup times on bank angles and timed reverse bank angles.
Astronaut Gordon Cooper, one of Grissom's best friends, guides them around the globe.
Hello there.
Then, they land 52 miles off target.
We're 50 miles from the spot there.
By the time the Navy finds them, they've been pitching in deep swells for 30 minutes, costing Grissom his breakfast.
Recovery, go ahead. Monitor, we have both Astros and Kilo at this time returning to the carrier. Roger. All well.
The capsule shows the scars of re-entry, but passes the flight test. It's airworthy and airtight. Few know that on the next Gemini flight, they'll open the hatch on purpose in space.
It was actually a kind of secret effort, and the rest is one of the most extraordinary episodes in the whole history of NASA.
Next step, learn to dock. Gemini 8 sends up 2 rookies, Dave Scott and Neil Armstrong.
I really believed that we wouldn't have any trouble with the docking based on the simulations we did.
This is Gemini Control Houston. About 2 minutes ago, Neil Armstrong called in and he was able to confirm that radar lock had been established.
The scene unfolds as if in slow motion.
We've got a visual on the Agena.
Even though both spacecraft are flying 10 times faster than a bullet.
Okay, Gemini 8, you're looking good on the ground. Go ahead and dock.
Armstrong and Scott nail it.
Flight, we are docked. Roger, Big Brother is watching. I bet those Lockheed guys are just jumping up and down.
Mission Control celebrates the first docking in space, a necessary skill for Apollo's moonshot. Then Gemini 8 drifts around the Earth, out of contact with Houston.
Murphy's Law says bad things always happen at the worst possible time.
Without warning, the 2 docked spacecraft begin to spin.
We first suspected that the Agena was the culprit.
They shut down the Agena's control system. But the spinning gets worse, and the astronauts get dangerously dizzy.
when the raids became quite violent, I concluded that we couldn't continue. We had to get ourselves separate. I was afraid we might lose consciousness.
With blurry eyesight, they ditch the Agena, thinking that's the culprit.
So they back off from the Agena, and rather than the spinning slowing down, it speeds up.
When Houston gets back in range, they find the crew in crisis.
We got serious problems here. We need to complement over in the northwest from the Agena.
The problem isn't the Agena. One of the capsule's own thrusters is stuck open, and they don't know it. It's now spinning once per second, and the crew is in danger of blacking out.
Neil realizes that the only way he's going to stop the spinning is to use the big thrusters.
The big thrusters are meant only for re-entry, but Armstrong has to engage them to wrestle Gemini 8 back from the brink.
Regaining control of the spacecraft slowly. Roger, copy.
The mission rules were that if you engage the re-entry system, that's the end of the mission.
They have to come home, making the U.S. space program's first emergency landing.
A lot of unexpected things happen, and usually they're not the ones you practice.
The command module and the Saturn V rocket have made it through their test flights. The lunar module as well. Now, Mission Control calls for the next test, an EVA, or extravehicular activity, commonly known as a spacewalk.
Everything's looking good.
The spacewalk falls to Schweikart. He'll be testing a brand new suit for the very first time.
All other astronauts who had ever walked in space had been attached to their spacecraft via umbilicals. In order to walk on the moon, you had to cut that tether. You had to have a complete life support system on your back.
Mr. Schweikart, proceed up forward.
Rusty got out of the lunar module. He was going to be the first to test the moon suit in the vacuum of space. Meanwhile, Dave Scott was sticking out of the command module hatch and photographing and observing while Rusty checked out the suit.
I'm glad we stopped here.
Dave was supposed to take movies of it so that we would document the stability of being able to do this. I started up the handrail, and Dave said, "Oh, the camera jammed." And so Jim said, "Okay, Dave, you got 5 minutes. Rusty, don't go in, just stay right there."
Scott ducks into the command module, leaving Schweikart to an out-of-this-world experience.
I just spun around and I looked at the Earth and I just said, my job right now is to just be a human being, just be a person. And I just, I stopped being an astronaut. There I was, a human being in space saying, absorb this, just soak this up, just let it all come in. That 5 minutes was a very, very special time.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 7. How do you read this time?
Day 2. The Apollo 7 team knows that the command module works.
Plan to refocus
but things with the crew are not going well.
and then shut it down.
Wally Schirra came down with a monster head cold.
Schirra's cold is misery in orbit. In the zero-gravity capsule, his sinuses just won't drain, and he quickly becomes irritable. On Earth, astronauts might turn to comfort food when they're sick. In space, there's really no such thing.
The space foods on the table here represent different meals throughout the day. So we have sugar-coated cereal, sausage patties, so this would make a nice breakfast. We have chicken stew, which would have been a lunch or a dinner item, and then butterscotch pudding and grapefruit drain.
First experiments in space food were cautious. Could astronauts even swallow in space? Nobody really knew. In 1962, John Glenn proved that astronauts can eat, at least from a tube. he could choose applesauce or pureed beef. Early space food isn't very appetizing. Scientists freeze dry and dehydrate it into bite-sized morsels and coat it with gelatin to stop down crumbs.
In space, crumbs don't fall, they float. And air filters could pick up those crumbs, and it would just create a maintenance problem for the astronauts, where they would need to clean those filters more often.
By the time of Apollo 7, added features make space food a bit more delicious.
Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and Walt Cunningham could rehydrate things that had a bit more flavor and dimension to them, dishes that might be more enjoyable and have some added flavors as well.
Quite a lot of concern down here.
But none of it is Mom's chicken soup. The mood in the command module quickly goes south.
We can't do that, though.
It made Schirra in particular a little bit grumpy.
Okay.
Flight director Glynn Lunny isn't used to hearing no, even from one of NASA's stars.
I think it came as a bit of a shock to some of the people on the ground that you have a space crew that's not necessarily going to do everything you want them to do.
I think we can work that out.
Schirra thinks the workload is way too much.
When Wally had a cold, everybody had to be miserable.
And there's no experience with the helmet on either, that one.
On the final descent, Mission Control tells the crew to put on their helmets.
We tried them on this morning.
The crew refuses.
If we had an open visor, I'd go along with that.
Schirra didn't want to do this because they needed to be able to clear their ears as the pressure changed during the descent.
Okay, I guess you better be prepared to discuss in some detail when we land why we haven't got them on. But it's your neck, and I hope you don't break it.
Thank you.
Even before the astronauts are back on Earth, mission controllers swear that none of them will ever fly again. 65 years to the month after the first American airplane lifted off, humankind is on its way to the moon. If all goes well, Apollo 8 will orbit the Earth 2.5 times, speed off 233,000 miles into deep space. Once they reach the moon, they will orbit 10 times, and then head back to Earth.
Schedule 137-311.
Manning the guidance and navigation station on Apollo 8 falls to Jim Lovell.
Apollo 8, Houston.
Mission Control has some good news. He's on an almost perfect course.
Apollo 8, Houston, you're looking good here, right down the center line. Roger, Apollo 8.
Now, it's time for one of the most critical maneuvers of the entire mission, to fire up their engine and then slow the spacecraft just enough to enter lunar orbit. The mood in the control room is tense. The spacecraft must fly into this orbit at a precise speed and location. Going too close or too slow will cause it to crash into the moon. Too far or too fast will send it on a one-way journey into space. Making it even more complicated, astronauts won't have mission control to help.
The key maneuvers had to take place when the astronauts were behind the moon. So they were completely cut off from Earth.
A really critical flight maneuver is happening, and there's no way to know until after it's all over.
All the training has built up to this moment. Now, the crew will be on their own.
Apollo 8, Houston, you're riding the best bird we can find, over.
People had navigated across oceans. People had found their way across continents. Nobody had ever found their way across 250,000 miles of interplanetary, interworld void before.
On Christmas Eve, Mission Control gives the go-ahead.
Apollo 8, Houston, 1 minute to LOS, all systems go. Roger, safe journey, guys. Thanks a lot, troops. We'll see you on the other side.
The men in Mission Control wait anxiously to see if Apollo 8 has survived its journey to the far side of the moon.
The worst thing that could happen, of course, would have been if they heard nothing. That would have meant that the astronauts had crashed on the far side of the moon. That was a very real possibility.
32 minutes after losing contact, ground control sends a test call out into space.
Apollo 8, Houston, over. Apollo 8, Houston, over. Go ahead, Houston, it's Apollo 8. Very complete. Apollo 8, this is Houston, roger. Good to hear your voice.
It was a critical step in being able to land on the moon.
Armstrong and Aldrin try to master the lunar module, knowing that it can be only so realistic on Earth.
They were pilots. They were trained to fly in Earth's atmosphere. Those skills are completely useless at the moon because there's no atmosphere.
They needed something called the Lunar Landing Training Vehicle, which was a special machine designed to replicate flying in the moon's 1/6 gravity, even though you were still on Earth.
Astronauts call it the flying bedstead. In the center, a big jet engine that points straight down, with a pilot's seat bolted on top. Each flight is a precarious venture.
There was no safety net. If you tilted too far, you could just fall out of the sky. You really had to be on your toes.
In 1968, Neil Armstrong prepares for his 21st flight in the Lunar Lander Trainer. The first 20 went well. But this one suffers a rare malfunction.
All of a sudden it lurched, kind of tipped over on one side.
With no time to spare, he was really close to a fatal accident. He was able to eject just in time.
Neil Armstrong had a particularly cool head. He went back to his desk and finished out his workday because he didn't see any reason that having just narrowly escaped death, he would clock out and go home early.
Apollo 11, 8 days after launch. Columbia blazes through the Earth's atmosphere at 36,000 feet per second. It splashes down in the Pacific. The USS Hornet is waiting. The Navy deploys a Sikorsky Sea King and 3 swimmers to retrieve the triumphant crew. Before the crew can board the ship, they must put on a new kind of suit. A biological isolation garment designed to prevent the spread of germs from outer space.
We were the first crew, of course, that was going to be exposed to the lunar surface material. And there was a fair amount of scientific debate as to whether that might anyway pose any hazard to people back on Earth.
Apollo 11's voyage for the ages ends in this trailer, called a mobile quarantine facility.
NASA knew fairly well that the environment on the moon was quite hostile to life, with the bright ultraviolet rays from the sun, which we use on Earth to kill germs all the time. But just to be sure, they agreed that it would be prudent to quarantine returning astronauts.
I could have stayed in there a lot longer. That was fine. A hot shower, that was the main thing, really, because I love hot showers, and of course there's not one on the command module, so I was grubby and glad to be back. Hot shower, gin, and steak, wow.
There was a little kitchenette there, a very state-of-the-art modern convenience of a microwave oven. To have microwave cooked meals was a real treat for the astronauts after their journey. And then there were bunks to sleep in. For them, it was spacious compared to all the time they had spent in the command module for a couple of weeks.
Soon, quarantine ends with a roar. The returning astronauts are treated as heroes. Their goodwill tour takes them to 24 countries in 45 days. Through it all, astronauts stress that the achievement doesn't just belong to 3 men on a rocket.
One thing that Neil Armstrong would emphasize again and again and again is that it wasn't just the 2 of them landing on the moon, but it was hundreds of thousands of people had worked around the clock and through the weekend for years to make sure that everything would go right.
After Apollo 12, the agency is preparing for 8 more lunar landings. They want to push further on the moon with improved spacesuits and new lunar rovers. But space enthusiasm is waning as mass protests and social change divide America.
Although there was a lot of interest in 11, and there was still quite a lot of interest in Apollo 12, there were so many other major issues people were grappling with at that time.
Issues like civil rights, the economy, and the Vietnam War. The president questions Apollo's worth, just as NASA unveils bold long-term plans. The agency pushes for reusable spaceships and space stations. Some even dream of space colonies. But the president is not on board.
NASA comes up with a very ambitious plan that they lay out, and the Nixon administration does not respond to that plan. They basically just sort of ignore it.
After Apollo 12's lightning strike,
I don't know what happened. I'm not sure if you hit by lightning.
NASA launches in pure sunshine. The skies are clear, but the crowds are thin.
Apollo 13 is go. 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13. The Saturn V building up to 7.6 million pounds of thrust, and it has cleared the tower.
Two days later, Marilyn Lovell and Mary Hayes visit Mission Control to watch their husband's TV broadcast. The astronauts give a tour of the command module Odyssey.
There he is, we see him.
And the lunar module Aquarius. But none of the networks carry it.
With Apollo 13, a lot of the interest, at least within the United States, had started to wane a bit. People weren't following the flight. There was a broadcast, but it didn't show on primetime TV.
Roger, sounds good, and this is the crew of Apollo 13. Wishing everybody there a nice evening and nice.
Apollo 13 is 7 minutes from Earth and may have a damaged heat shield. The crew and Houston do final checks.
Okay, go ahead.
So, here we are, 30 years old, dealing with this problem of national significance. We trained and thought and prepared ourselves to be able to handle eventualities as bad as that, with the confidence that if there was a way to thread through it, that we would find it and be able to make it.
The crew also thanks Houston, just in case.
Well, all of us here want to thank all you guys down there for the very fine job you did. That's the firm, Joe.
I tell you, we all had a good time doing it.
With 14 minutes to re-entry, the world pauses and prays.
Range to go now, 3,271 nautical miles. Odyssey Houston, your Disky is doing all the right.
Controllers have done all they can.
Okay, thank you.
The crew hopes for something they've lacked: luck. During re-entry, the capsule will reach temperatures of 5,000 degrees. That will cause a communications blackout, which usually lasts 3 minutes. The 3-minute mark comes and goes.
And then 3:30 passed, and then 3:45 passed, and then 4 minutes passed, and then 4:15 passed.
Odyssey Houston, over.
There were surely people in mission control and in the homes who thought, we've never hit 4.5 minutes. It's naive to think these guys are still alive.
Specialized tracking aircraft called Araya search for Odyssey's signal.
Apollo 13 should be out of blackout at this time. We're standing by for any reports of Araya acquisition.
Houston tries again.
Odyssey Houston, standing by, over.
Okay, go.
Okay, we read you, Jack.
That was Jim Lovell responding with the OK Joe.
Odyssey Houston, we show you on the mains. It really looks great.
An extremely loud applause as Apollo 13 on main chutes comes through loud and clear on the television display here.
Apollo 13, this is recovery, over.
NASA will later learn the cause of the agonizing delay.
It hit at a slightly wrong angle when it first hit the atmosphere, and that caused the longest re-entry blackout in the history of the space program.
The floor of the Mission Operations Control Room now crowded, and there are visible smiles on the faces of the flight controllers and astronauts in this room.
For 8 years, NASA had been shooting for the moon. Little did they know their ultimate test would be reaching planet Earth. For NASA, reaching the moon was just phase 1 of their plan. Phase 2 is hard science. Rock samples from the first 2 landings revolutionized our understanding of the moon. They revealed moon rocks are similar to Earth rocks, and that much of the lunar surface was once covered in molten lava.
And being able to have those physical samples is a whole new kind of science that really begins as soon as those samples start to come back to Earth.
Apollo 14. The crew's next task: collect samples from surrounding craters. The forces that make craters blast ancient rocks to the surface. Shepard and Mitchell collect the biggest payload yet, 92 pounds of rocks and soil, which could help scientists determine what forces shaped the moon and Earth.
The moon is kind of like the rare book room of the cosmic library. None of the things that have erased the earliest history on the Earth, the motion of continents, the action of water and wind, those things haven't happened on the moon. You go to the moon and you can start paging through the earliest history of the solar system, beautifully preserved.
Among their samples, a stunning find. One moon rock, dubbed Big Bertha, contains an Earth fragment, the oldest one ever discovered. Researchers think the fragment landed on the moon eons ago when an asteroid hit Earth and blasted pieces of it to the moon. It's time to shift geology into overdrive with the brand new Lunar Rover. Engineers began working on lunar cars in the early 1960s. But it was mostly a project in guesswork. since no one had been to the moon.
Early engineering, like, let's design a car for an environment we know absolutely nothing about. That takes a certain amount of hubris, but hubris is where it begins.
Early models were too heavy, too big, or too unwieldy. Plus, there was no way to get them to the moon. The lunar module had limited storage space. Engineers finally came up with an ingenious idea: a collapsible car. It fits inside a segment of the lunar module and unfolds with a lanyard. To keep astronauts from bouncing off, NASA installs tow holes and a seatbelt. Engineers also literally reinvent the wheel.
There's no exact knowledge about what you would be going over. So the wheels had to be flexible and transformable. What they came up with is using a mesh of basically steel wire, the kind of wire that you use in a piano, woven on a loom, formed into a cylinder, and then wrapped around a hub so that it formed sort of a shape of a tire. The nice thing about being woven is that it comes back basically to the shape it was before.
Okay, that's good. Roger.
The rover is a game changer for the next mission, Apollo 15. They hit top speeds of 6 miles an hour. But on the moon, that's a wild ride.
Ben, this is really a rock and rollin' ride, isn't it?
Your heading is beautiful. Continue on.
It was a very strange sensation to drive on the moon. It was almost like being in a rowboat on a choppy sea.
No, the moon white folks.
In July 1969, America is on the brink of a huge win in the space race, putting a man on the moon. But just a day before the launch, NASA faces a massive protest. The Poor People's Campaign descends on Cape Kennedy with mules to represent American inequality, and that 8 million African Americans live in poverty, while $3 billion is being spent on space.
We were for the advances of science wherever they might come, but we still don't want to forget the least of these, God's children. And I think that was Dr. King's message in life. I can hear him saying, wait a minute, don't get to the moon and forget the poverty that we have here on Earth.
For any nation that will spend billions of dollars to put a man on the moon and will not spend $60 to stand one on his feet right down here on Earth.
If it were possible for us tomorrow morning to not push the button and to solve the problems to which you are concerned, believe me, we would not push the button.
Columbia, this is Houston reading you loud and clear, over.
A rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon.
Whitey on the Moon was an effective protest song because it forced people to confront the hypocrisy of America at this time. America put a man on the moon, but at the same time, we hadn't figured out how to treat everyone with equality.
July 16, 1969. Nearly a decade of innovation at breakneck speed comes together for one defining mission, Apollo 11. The dreams of millions and the work of thousands are now in the hands of 3 men, led by Neil Armstrong. As the crews say their farewells to ground staff at Kennedy, Houston stands by to take over mission control when the Saturn V clears the tower.
You have a feeling of intense relief. There's no more training, there's no more reworking these procedures. We're going to launch, and we're going to go to the surface of the moon, and we're going to bring that crew back.
After 3 days of traveling almost 5 miles per second, the Earth is just a distant marble. The moon looms below, cold and gray. Armstrong and Aldrin enter the lunar module, separate from Collins in the command module, and approach the surface.
Literally within seconds, we have communications problems, and that's the one thing we need in order to go down to the surface of the moon.
Apollo 11, this is Houston, over.
Armstrong spins the lunar module around to see if that enables them to hear the vital message they're waiting for. Go for landing.
We finally got a lock on through all the static, and this was crucial because this is the last time that the mission control is getting data on our orbit before we start making the maneuver-powered descent.
But then the lunar module starts guiding the crew to the wrong landing site. Armstrong takes manual control, seeking level ground.
We didn't realize that he was about to land in a boulder field. Well, it turns out the computer was off by a little bit, a mile and a half, 2 miles. Put us into a crater.
With Armstrong flying farther than planned to avoid a calamitous landing, fuel levels start dipping dangerously low.
He had to level off, fly across this boulder field, pitch up, slow down, and then start down on the final stages of descent. Well, that takes a lot of gas. And so we were getting very low on fuel. We had a minimum for an abort. So I called Eagle 60 seconds, and he would have an abort call.
60 seconds. Lights on.
We're still 100 feet off the ground, and we got a ways to go, and I'm getting a little nervous, but I'm not about to interrupt Neil. He saw the light, he heard the command, he's in control.
And then I called Eagle 30 seconds, and now they were close, but not on the ground, so the tension was really extreme in mission control. It was, as I recall, dead silence, and everybody was glued to their monitor.
Fortunately, by the time 30 seconds came, we were about 10 feet off the ground, and I'm beginning to see a shadow. And in a few more seconds, we're picking up the dust, and then the probe coming down from the landing gear touches the ground, and it sends a signal that says contact. So I call out contact light.
Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
6 hours after landing, Armstrong steps into his place in history.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
20 minutes later, Aldrin makes his small step. 600 million people around the world watched the first humans walk on the moon, the largest global television audience in history.
In 1968, America is competing in an entirely different kind of race. Beating the Russians to the moon becomes an all-consuming crusade. Apollo 8 would be the first manned mission to leave the Earth's orbit, the first to reach the moon, and the first to orbit another heavenly body. It was risky because they had no backup engine. If there was an equipment failure, they couldn't come home.
The chances of coming back, I thought they were a little bit better than 50-50. I thought that the rewards of being on that flight were worth the risk involved.
We have commit. We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51.
The journey takes them to a place no human eyes had ever seen. The far side of the moon, and out of radio contact with Earth.
Well, we were like three school kids looking into a candy store window, looking at those craters going by.
The crew becomes the first in human history to witness the rising of the Earth behind the surface of the moon.
film, Jim? Hand me a roll of color quick. Oh, man, that's great. Where is it? Quick. Oh, I got it right. Oh, that's a beautiful shot.
The image is now known around the world as Earthrise.
No one had ever taken a photograph like that before. And to see the Earth, us, from that distance, it was progress, before your very eyes.
Christmas Eve, 1968 falls on the 4th day of the mission.
For all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. Good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good Earth.
Straight ahead, please, nice smile.
Apollo 13 was released in 1995. With its star, Tom Hanks, and director Ron Howard attending a series of premieres around the world.
I wanted to make this an adventure, but at the same time, these are about real people, and it's a true story, and I wanted to honor that.
The film earned 9 Academy Award nominations. But it wasn't the Academy Ron Howard really wanted to impress.
One of the most nerve-wracking screenings that I've ever had was when we showed the movie before it had been in theatrical release in Houston. And many astronauts and mission controllers came to this screening, and man, my stomach was churning.
The movie nearly didn't happen at all, since the book it's based on, co-authored by leading science writer Jeffrey Kluger, almost didn't get published.
The response was, nobody is going to want to read about 3 men who didn't land on the moon 25 years ago.
Kluger persevered, spending many hours with Apollo 13 commander Jim Lovell, played by Tom Hanks in the movie.
When we did finally have a proposal done and sent it around to publishers, 11 of 13 publishers still passed on the book. Only 2 made an offer.
But when the story reached Ron Howard's production company, he saw potential right away.
I tend, as a director, just to sort of fall in love with an idea. It's not only a survival story, but it also turns out it's a rescue story. This is something that we discovered as we began developing it. The idea of rescue, survival, that's good drama.
What this drama, 3 men's quest for the moon, has in abundance is nail-biting tension. All of it drawn from real life, and much of it captured by news cameras long before Hollywood took up the story.
Houston, we've had a problem. Stand by, they got a problem. Yeah, that jolt must have rocked the sensor on O2 quantity 2. And Jack, our O2 quantity number 2 tank is reading 0. Did you get that?
O2 quantity number 2 is 0.
And it looks to me, looking out the hatch, that we are venting something. We are venting something out into space.
Roger, we copy your venting. Okay, 13, we've got lots and lots of people working on this. We'll get you some dope as soon as we have it, and you'll be the first one to know.
Do you expect that we're going to be in a thermal problem for the next many hours? Well, the thing that concerns me is throwing equipment. We had a problem. We don't know the cause of the problem. Flight, I've got a feeling we've lost 2 fuel cells. I hate to put it that way, but I don't know why we've lost them.
We're in serious problem. We can't get any pressure there, and we got to power down some more.
That's right. And luckily we got the LEM.
Yeah, but that's not going to help this fuel cell. If we can't save that pressure, we're going to lose this third fuel cell. Okay, Jack. It looks like O2 tank 1 pressure is just a hair over 200.
We confirm that here, and the temperature also confirms it.
Okay, does it look like it's still going down?
It's slowly going to zero, and we're starting to think about the LEM lifeboat.
Yeah, that's what we're thinking about too.
We figure we've got about 15 minutes worth of power left in the command module, so we want you to start getting over in the LEM and getting some power on that.
You want to discontinue that?
Discontinue the charge on battery A, Jack.
Okay, I need some LEM IMU align procedure.
Yeah. Friday, huh? Go. We need to go ahead and start that powering down anytime.
Dial attitude control, LEM flight.
Let's be sure we have control on the LEM, although he's probably out of jets right now. GNC, you got anything for the CSN? PCS, you got a number for me?
Yeah, we're leaking at about 3.2 pounds a minute.
What's the number, George?
About 15 minutes.
At this moment, all power has been turned off in the command module, and the crew are living on the emergency battery power supply of the lunar module. Houston says that they will get back to Earth alive only if the lunar module's systems work perfectly all the way. So, for the first time in the history of spaceflight, there is no backup system to save them if anything goes wrong.
July 16th, 1969.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Americans crowd highways and beaches to witness the launch of Apollo 11 from the Kennedy Space Center. On board, astronauts Michael Collins, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
From the Oval Office, President Nixon watches along with 600 million people worldwide.
Tranquility, we copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue.
Biggest TV audience ever at that time. On July 20th, the world sees the first men, Americans, walk on the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hello, Neil and Buzz.
From the White House, the president congratulates the astronauts.
I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you have done. For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives.
The promise John Kennedy made at the start of the decade has been fulfilled. America has won the space race. It is Americans who show the world the view from the moon.
Flight Econ.
Go ahead, Econ.
You better think about getting in the LEM or using the LEM systems.
What they knew they had to do, since power was gone in here, was get over to the lunar module and stay there. This would be a way that they could stay alive for the next several days until they could come home.
The problem was the lunar module was designed only for the moon landing, and then 33 hours on the surface. But now, they'd be living in it for days, and the chemical filters that removed carbon dioxide from the air wouldn't last that long.
Just like a charcoal filter in a home water filter, ultimately it becomes saturated and you have to switch it.
The carbon dioxide was rising in the lunar module. And carbon dioxide in that magnitude is poisonous to humans.
You certainly lose capability to think clearly, to do any reasoning, and somebody could become totally unconscious with that, depending on if the level got high enough.
And it's then the real story trumps anything Hollywood could possibly have invented.
The crew needed new filters. Well, they could easily get them from the command module, but the command module filters were square. The lunar module filters were round. The challenge was essentially to find a way to make a square peg fit in a round hole, to adapt the square canister from the command module to the round slot in the lunar module.
We gotta find a way to make this fit into the hole for this using nothing but that. So let's get it organized. Okay, let's build a filter.
But in reality, it was just one man who found the solution, Cruise Systems Chief Ed Smiley. And 40 years later, he still remembers exactly how he saved the day.
We worked from the stowage list, which was just a list of everything that's on board. And so we discovered duct tape. We said, aha.
The astronauts' lives would depend on a plastic bag, the cardboard cover from the flight plan, and a hose from one of the spacesuits.
We put the plastic bag over the canister. We take tape and tape it to the canister to seal it.
Next, one end of the hose was fed into the plastic bag, and when the other end was connected to the circulation fan in the ship, it sucked air through the filter.
The fan is drawing the oxygen through. It would solve the CO2 problem.
People constantly want to talk to me about that moment. People have told me that, you know, in management courses, that they play that clip and talk about that kind of by the seat of your pants problem solving. And it was just that was a gift when we discovered that scene.
April 14, 1970. Rookie astronauts Fred Hayes and Jack Swigert and Commander Jim Lovell, a veteran of 3 NASA missions, are 2 days into the 3rd moon landing attempt on Apollo 13.
This loud bang occurred. I could hear and saw some warping of the metal in the tunnel.
The lights started to flash and jets started to fire, and I looked up at Fred to see if he knew what was causing all this commotion, and I could tell he didn't know.
Warning lights indicate something is wrong with the electrical system. Then more lights. 2 out of the 3 fuel cells have just died.
We've had a problem here.
Can say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem. See, and it looks to me, looking out the hatch, that we are venting something. We are venting something out into space.
What the astronauts saw was frozen oxygen spilling out of their own air supply.
At that moment, everybody recognized that this was survival, and we started moving in an entirely different fashion.
Mission Control has been handed the job of their lives. Without inventive solutions, the crew will perish. Their crisis is immediate. In the command module, both oxygen and power are dwindling fast.
Okay, let's make sure that we don't do anything that will cause us to lose fuel cell number 2.
On the stricken spacecraft, energy is in short supply. So all superfluous life support systems are shut off. But even with everything powered down, the air supply will not hold out long enough. The 3 astronauts are exhaling deadly CO2 into the tiny lunar module.
The amount of pressure of carbon dioxide was building up in the lunar module.
Spare canisters in the command module could save the crew. But these spares are square, and the lunar module carbon scrubber is round. Mission Control needs to figure something out.
So engineering comes up with the idea to fabricate an adapter to fit the square scrubber into the round hole, test it in the laboratories, and voice the instructions up to the crew.
And they used duct tape, a piece of cardboard, and a piece of plastic, and an old sock.
Literally within minutes, the crew could see the carbon dioxide pressure starting to drop.
The harrowing ordeal of Apollo 13 was a stark reminder that we had not tamed space. Ultimately, it was the highly skilled teamwork of Mission Control that saved the day.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. Okay, Neil, we can see you coming.
Over 600 million people watched the live broadcast.
Okay. I'm at the foot of the ladder.
Well, it was an enormously significant event, and that's the way it was intended, because this is about demonstrating American prowess from a scientific and technical perspective, and the whole world watched.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Everything paused on Times Square as being broadcast there. Around the world, the same sorts of things were happening. And it really was, for just a very few minutes, people kind of pausing and saying, I'm part of this much bigger thing where humanity has now set foot on another body in the solar system. And they were very excited about it.
Beautiful view. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here. Magnificent desolation.
What did it look like? Well, it looked like black sky. The horizon with no air was so defined. You could see a rock, a boulder, on the horizon, a mile and a half away, with no atmosphere and no impediments to the vision. And the sun behind us, we could just see so clearly.
And we're getting a picture on the TV.
But it was not so clear to people back on Earth. As ghostly and grainy images were broadcast live on TV, skeptics already may have been thinking that something was up.
Their mission was to land on an unexplored part of the moon. They would spend 10 days in space. But the scheduled launch time, chosen right to the minute for the optimum conditions in space, only added to the superstitious notion that Apollo 13 was tempting fate.
The launch took off at 1:13 p.m. Central Time, which is 13:13 p.m. But this really was set strictly by the cold and objective laws of physics and orbital mechanics.
Roger, how's it look, Econ? You got your space? Looks good, Mike. Okay.
From my standpoint, I never even considered 13 an unlucky mission. I don't think any of my controllers did. The crew certainly didn't. We have to eliminate any element of superstition. We deal with facts.
Flight controller Gene Kranz was a key figure in the real Apollo 13 mission. Played on screen by Ed Harris, the real Kranz is a tough, level-headed ex-fighter pilot. But as the movie depicts, despite his disdain for superstition, Kranz started every mission, including Apollo 13, with a distinctive white vest, hand-stitched by his wife.
Ignition sequence start.
As this third mission to the moon blasted off the launch pad, NASA was confident nothing had been left to chance.
Okay, paddle has it. Looks good here, flight. Shut down. Roger, shut down.
That was Commander Jim Lovell reporting shutdown. The engine is off.
I say that was a good burn.
Guidance reported that the burn duration was literally right on the money.
Jim Lovell indicated to Mission Control a short time ago how weary they've become.
We're going to have to start thinking about getting back to sleep again because we've gone a hell of a long time without any sleep.
I tell you, Deke, it's cold up in there. I don't know whether we'll be able to sleep up there tonight. It must be about 35 or 40 degrees.
The latest problems for the unlucky Apollo 13 and for the astronauts came late tonight when carbon dioxide began building up in their spaceship. The Apollo 13 carries lithium hydroxide canisters to cleanse the air of carbon dioxide, but the canisters in the command ship are not operating at the moment.
The first thing we want you to do, cut off the outer bag by cutting along one of the heat seals. Do it carefully and close to the heat seal because we may have to use the outer bag if we damage the inner bag.
Go get our quick spot on that canister work.
Jack, I think you asked if the canister mod was working, and the answer is it sure as hell is.